Imagine yourself under the soft glow of a single candle. The air around you cool, the sounds of the modern world quieting as we slip back into a time when kings wore heavy robes and walked across cold, uneven stone floors in the dark of night. Tonight, you will meet a king most history books do not bother to mention. His name was Baldwin IV of Flanders, a small region you would now know as part of Belgium. It was a quiet corner of Europe in the 11th century, a place of foggy mornings, wooden houses that creaked in the wind, and muddy streets where people moved slowly, wrapped in wool cloaks. Baldwin was not a grand king like those sung about in epic poems. He did not conquer vast lands or lead mighty crusades. Instead, Baldwin found himself drawn to the dim corners of smoky taverns, where men gathered around rough wooden tables, their faces lit only by flickering lanterns as they played dice and cards. The low murmur of their voices mixing with the sound of crackling fires. Baldwin, you see, had a secret. When the castle guards thought he was asleep in his thick feather bed, Baldwin would quietly leave his chambers, wrapping himself in a heavy cloak to blend in with the night. He would slip through the kitchen where the last embers of the hearth glowed softly, past barrels of salted fish and dried beans, through the cold stone halls where the only sound was the echo of his own footsteps. He would emerge into the dark streets where the air smelled of damp earth and smoke, where the moonlight pooled in puddles left from the day's rain, and the fog curled around the cobbled streets like a restless spirit. Baldwin would find himself in a small tavern at the edge of town, a place where the wooden beams were blackened from smoke, and the floors were covered in rushes that rustled underfoot. Here, merchants, mercenaries, and peasants gathered to drink weak ale and gamble with whatever coins they could spare. For Baldwin, it was not about the money. He had enough wealth in his coffers to feed the town twice over. It was the thrill, the soft clack of dice against the table, the tense silence as cards were turned over, the flicker of a smile when he won, the quiet groan of loss when he did not. He found peace there, in the quiet tension of the game, away from the heavy responsibilities of ruling, the endless petitions from lords demanding more land, the priests who wanted more tithes, the peasants who begged for more grain during a lean winter. In the tavern, he was simply a man among men, with no crown on his head, no scepter in his hand, only a cup of warm ale in front of him, and a few copper coins resting on the table, waiting to be wagered. But what Baldwin did not realize was that even the smallest of secrets could ripple through a kingdom. Coins lost at the gambling table were not truly lost. They were felt in the repairs that went undone in the castle, the shipments of grain that were smaller than planned, the mercenaries whose wages went unpaid until Baldwin found the coin to cover them after a lucky night. Some nights, Baldwin would return to the castle in the pre-dawn darkness, the fog still thick, his purse lighter, the distant sound of roosters crowing. He would quietly remove his cloak, return to his chambers, and lie down on his feather bed, the cold stone walls pressing in, the smell of smoke still on his clothes. His advisors would find him in the morning, bleary-eyed and distant, as they presented him with petitions, disputes between neighboring lords, or requests from the church. Baldwin would sign documents without fully reading them, his mind still lingering on the roll of dice, the sound of them bouncing against the wood, the slight smile of the merchant who had won his last few coins. And so, Baldwin's small scandal lived on, quiet and hidden, known only to those few who watched the king slip into the night and return as dawn broke. His kingdom did not fall, but it strained under the weight of unspoken debts and promises made under candlelight, where the stakes were not always counted in coins, but in small decisions that slowly shaped the future of Flanders. And so, tonight, as you listen to the rain tapping softly on your window or the quiet hum of the night around you, consider this. How many kingdoms in history were quietly shifted, not by great wars or grand decrees, but by a tired king rolling dice in the dark, seeking the comfort of a game to forget the weight of a crown? While Baldwin of Flanders gambled away quiet coins in smoky taverns, another king, in another corner of medieval Europe, was forgetting who he was entirely. King Charles VI of France, born in 1368, came to the throne when he was just 11 years old. France was a kingdom in turmoil, caught between the endless disputes of feudal lords and the ongoing chaos of the 100 Years' War. But young Charles, crowned in Reims, was seen as hope, a promise that perhaps under his reign, peace might come to France. But the weight of the crown is heavy, and for Charles, it became heavier than most could bear. His youth was filled with banquets and tournaments, with the rustling of silk robes and the soft laughter of courtiers, echoing through the cold stone halls of the Louvre and the castles of the Loire. Yet beneath the layers of fine fabric and the comforting sounds of courtly life, there was a quiet fracture forming in Charles's mind. It began one hot summer in 1392, during a military campaign against a rebellious duke. Charles, dressed in armor, leading his knights through a forest in Brittany, suddenly stopped. He turned, drew his sword, and attacked his own men, shouting that they were traitors. His eyes were wild, his face pale, as he swung his blade until he was restrained, and he collapsed, unconscious, under the canopy of whispering leaves. When he awoke, the world was different. The king who had once loved jousts and banquets now slipped into long silences, staring at the walls as if waiting for them to speak. Some days, he would scream in terror, claiming he was made of glass and begging his servants not to touch him, fearing he would shatter. Other days, Charles would forget that he was a king at all. He would wander the halls of the palace, unwashed and unshaven, wearing layers of dirty robes, refusing to let them be removed. Convinced he was no longer the ruler of France, but an ordinary peasant, lost in the maze of stone and candlelight. His advisors, desperate to maintain stability, would stage court gatherings where Charles would sit quietly, nodding at ambassadors, unable to remember their faces or why they were there. France continued, like a cart rolling slowly down a muddy road, guided by the king's uncles and nobles, while Charles drifted further into the silence of his mind. His queen, Isabeau of Bavaria, tried to manage the court and protect their children from the chaos. But rumors spread through Paris, rumors of a mad king, of a cursed royal family, of a France led by a man who no longer remembered who he was. The people of France, many living in hunger and fear, would see their king being led through the gardens, a vacant look in his eyes as he tried to touch the flowers without breaking them, whispering about glass and shadows. And yet, through all this, the kingdom endured. The wars continued, the merchants traded, the peasants tilled the land, and life went on, even as their king quietly forgot that he was meant to lead them. And so, as you lie here tonight, letting your breathing slow, consider this: how many kingdoms survived, not because of the strength of their kings, but because life simply continued, quietly, under the watchful eyes of a ruler who no longer remembered his own crown. Far to the north, where winters are long and the light of the sun stretches lazily across the snow, there was another king who found himself slipping away from the expectations of his court. King Eric XIV of Sweden, crowned in 1560, was a man of ambition and sharp intellect. He studied astronomy, languages, and the art of governance, determined to strengthen Sweden's independence in a Europe dominated by larger powers. He wore fine clothes embroidered with silver and kept a careful court filled with scholars and advisors. But beneath the calm exterior of royal dignity, something darker grew within him. Eric was convinced that conspiracies surrounded him, that nobles plotted in the shadows, that even the smiles of courtiers were hiding daggers. His paranoia began as a whisper, a quiet thought in the back of his mind, but soon it grew louder, echoing in the halls of his mind. He began to arrest nobles on suspicion of treason, imprisoning them in cold stone towers, interrogating them under candlelight, demanding confessions for plots that may have never existed. He would walk through his halls at night, listening for whispers, convinced that every creaking floorboard was the footstep of a traitor. His paranoia reached its peak in 1567, during the infamous Stir murders. Eric, in a fit of fear and rage, personally killed several high-ranking nobles, staining the stone floors of Uppsala Castle with the quiet drip of blood in the cold air. His court was horrified, the whispers growing louder now, no longer hidden behind false smiles. Eric had crossed a line, and the kingdom began to shift beneath him. But it was not a grand battle or a rebellion that finally ended Eric's reign. It was a bowl of peas porridge. In 1577, after being deposed and imprisoned in a fortress, Eric was served a bowl of warm peas porridge. It was simple food, the kind that peasants across Sweden would eat. The steam rising in the cold air, the smell of earth and salt, comforting and familiar. And in that bowl, there was poison. Eric XIV of Sweden, who had spent his reign consumed by fears of conspiracies and betrayal, died quietly after eating his meal, alone in a cold stone room. The warmth of the porridge, the last comfort he would know. Finally, we drift into the cold forests of Bohemia, where the winds whisper through the dark trees and the stars shine coldly in the sky. Sa, King Wenceslaus IV of Bohemia, crowned in 1378, found himself at the center of a kingdom in religious and political turmoil. The church was splitting, the nobility was restless, and the peasants were beginning to stir, tired of heavy taxes and endless demands. Wenceslaus, a man with a sharp mind, felt the pressure of these conflicts, the demands of the church and nobles pulling at him from all directions. And so, Wenceslaus decided to rebel in the only way he could. He began to sleep. For days, he would refuse to rise from his bed, ignoring the calls of advisors and the demands of his nobles. They would gather in his chambers, bowing deeply, only to find the king still under his heavy blankets, eyes closed, the quiet sound of his breathing, the only reply to their pleas for decisions. Some believed it was laziness, others thought it was madness. But to Wenceslaus, it was the only escape from the endless noise of power. In the silence of his chamber, beneath the warm weight of blankets, with the flickering glow of a single candle nearby, he could simply exist. Outside, the kingdom continued, conflicts growing, the fires of rebellion sparking in small villages, the nobles whispering in dark halls. But inside, Wenceslaus remained in the soft darkness of sleep. He would wake briefly, eat a small meal of bread and broth, then return to the silence of sleep, letting the world outside continue its noisy chaos. And in that quiet rebellion, Wenceslaus became a symbol of a truth few rulers ever learn. Sometimes the loudest act of defiance is simply to rest. Tonight, as you drift into your own sleep, consider this. How many kings and queens across history, burdened by crowns and expectations, quietly longed for the peace you find in sleep, the soft darkness where the weight of the world is lifted, if only for a while.